There we go. Awesome. So yeah, please keep putting those introductions in, and I'll go ahead and get started with my part here. Again, my name is Brandon Boltz. I'm one of the Training Academy faculty, full-time staff here in Alberta. And I'm really excited to talk about risk management, mostly because I truly believe that well-managed risk and well-managed adventures set us up for more adventures, more grand adventures, more of them. And that, there's been times in our career or in our lives, maybe that that same risk management consideration wasn't necessarily taken into consideration, and just kind of there's ripple effects for participants, for ourselves, and having an understanding of those ripple effects, and ways to avoid negative experiences, misadventure, the difference between healthy and unhealthy risk, I think is going to expand our opportunities with our participants. So I feel pretty passionate about it. I'll also acknowledge that it's still something that I'm always learning and growing from. I think that's one of the key things with risk management is it is ever evolving, and depending on where you're working at or working from, that risk might be different. And yeah, I really am excited to talk to you all about that today. So yeah, I'm here in Canmore, Alberta, on Treaty 7 land, traditional home of the Iyarhe Nakota, the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Tsuut'ina, Kainai, Ktunaxa, Métis Region number 3, and a plethora of other Indigenous folks that have been calling this area home since time immemorial. I'm really grateful for my opportunities to have learned and grown on this land, and all that it continues to teach me. I was talking about the Training Academy recently with folks, and largely I get to bring folks into the greatest classroom I can think of, and it's the land. And yeah, I'm just so grateful that we, as facilitators, teachers, guides, have the opportunity to work with the land like we do. Yeah, so yeah, and thank you to everyone here in the chat. Thanks, Samantha. Thanks, is it Myra? How do I pronounce that there? Christine, Bertha. Hi, Bertha. We were in Training Academy together. That's great. Christine, and yeah. So yeah, key takeaways today. What is risk? Different kinds of risk, emotional risk, ways to mitigate risk, as well as near misses. I find this one's a bit of a tricky subject for some folks, just identifying what a near miss is, what to do with the information once a near miss has occurred. So I wanted to touch briefly on that today, and then like to leave room for questions and personal stories at the end. Ideally, I'll only be taking up about an hour of everybody's time, but that'll be my content. Questions and stories, we got plenty of time for. So jumping right into it, if my computer will allow. I haven't figured out why certain things are showing on the back end, but not on the front end here. So bear with me one more time. All right. Do we have a definition for risk on our screen? Shake your head. Yes, if so. Perfect. I really like definitions. And a nice and easy one to start out with is, what is risk? It's a situation involving exposure to danger, or to expose someone or something valued to danger, harm, or loss. And this is kind of where I want us to start shaping and rethinking risk and applying that emotional risk to that, specifically to, you know, that verb there of exposing someone or something valued to danger, harm, or loss. I think when we're talking about emotional risk, it's important to consider, you know, that the thing of value that somebody might have that they feel is at risk of being, you know, damaged or otherwise could be something close to them, to their heart, their feelings, their way of being, their faith, spirituality, etc. And so, you know, when we're speaking about risk management, considering it from that angle as well, and just, you know, what is risk and the things that we might have to lose. Additionally, management, not too difficult of a definition there, but the conducting or supervising of something, such as a business. Maybe some of you are business owners, operators, you have your own guiding company. This feels pretty relevant, the management side of things, but you mash it all together. Risk management is the forecasting and evaluation of risks together with the identification of procedures to avoid or minimize their impact. So, you know, in the outdoor world, a lot of what we do is inherently risky. I don't know how many pieces of gear I have that have warning labels that inform me that the thing that I need, or I need that item for, is inherently risk. So there's certain things that we accept, we mitigate, we transfer, but largely risk management in this concept is being able to identify and minimize the impact of these risks. Any questions so far? Christine, are you there? Did you have a question? All right, we'll move on. The mic turned on, so I wasn't sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to turn my mic on.
Oh, that's okay. Just wanted to check. Why did this suddenly stop? Okay, great. Different kinds of risk, perceived versus actual risk. Perceived risk is an activity or an event that is being processed through our human filter. Our perception of the risk is changed depending on our experiences or inexperiences, our knowledge, societal views on that topic, or otherwise. As a facilitator, guide, or leader, this could be considered a soft skill, and perceived risk might be a subjective hazard. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Is there anything in anybody's, you know, personal world that you do that others perceive as risky and you don't? Feel free to share or just nod your head. I do risky things that my family, you know, I rock climb, and the perceived risk of that is pretty high. But with certain tools and experience, my perceived risk of it is actually quite low. Does that resonate with anybody else in their world? Awesome. So the actual risk, the real hazards, the rockfall, the wildlife, slips, trips, and falls, those are the objective hazards on an outdoor adventure, or, you know, it doesn't have to be an outdoor adventure. That was something I wanted to mention before, is that risk is kind of present in all aspects of our life. If you're more business minded, financial risk is something that people talk about a lot. But for our application in this outdoor world that we teach and recreate in, these are the real hazards. So the objective hazards on an outdoor adventure, to an extent, these can be planned for and assessed in advance. This is a technical skill that is developed through training and ongoing experience. So hopefully before you head out on a day hike, a paddle, anything with another group of students or even your friends, you take a moment to assess what are the actual risks that you might be stepping out into. So, as an example, it's springtime here in the Rockies. We don't have a whole lot of snow on the ground, but there's loads and loads of ice on the ground. So if I'm writing up a trip report or, a preamble for my day out, one of the hazards that I would identify is slippery terrain. Potential other ones, we'll go over later and are covered through here, but wildlife, I've mentioned, if you're a paddler, cold water, foot entrapments, things like that might be actual hazards, real risks for your day. So then again, further defining certain things. Objective hazards are usually quantifiable and visible. Again, these are your quote unquote real risks. So they can be representative of the overall condition of the environment. So if avalanche terrain is somewhere that you operate within and avalanche risk is high in one area or one exposure aspect of the mountains, it's probably pretty similar throughout that mountain range. So that's where we get the overall condition of the environment. Similarly, if high water, fast water, etc., is a concern, there's probably good reason. It's probably been raining lots, or it's early in the season and you have lots of melt that's feeding your rivers. So, fast moving cold water, that's probably an overall condition. And identifying these objective hazards, it takes practice, it takes experience. It takes messing up from time to time. And this risk mitigation is really where the mistakes are something we can learn from, and B, as minimal as possible. A subjective hazard is more of an expression of our humanness, our personalities, our attitudes, and our states of mind. They can be unknown to ourselves, to the other members of our group, and they can just be held internally. So this is more of that emotional hazard. These are things that I bring to a group or an experience with others that maybe I'm not forthcoming with the information. Maybe I do share some of the information about myself as a participant, but it omits other things. And so it's not always that easy to identify, and again, takes time to work with and be able to flesh out with participants. Does anybody have any questions? Objective hazards and subjective hazards and the direction we're going so far.
Brandon, I was just wondering, will you be sharing the PowerPoint presentation with us? Because there is a lot of content. And so I know I can't take all the notes I'd like to take. So I'm just wondering if this will be shared with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're recording, and you can feel free to watch this and listen to it as many times as you'd like. And as part of the link that we'll send out with the other links that I'll include in this, I'll also include the PowerPoint. So yeah, if note taking feels like what you want to do, great. If you just want to be here now and listen to my droning, that's awesome as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Great. So objective hazards, subjective hazards, perceived risk, actual risk, it's all kind of checking out, all kind of making sense so far. A little bit of emotional risk management. So the first thing that I want us to consider is, what are you doing with your participants? A lot of my background comes from working within summer camps and outdoor education centers, where I'd have, with an outdoor education center, a group of students that's coming with their class, and there's already preconceived notions of who's who in the classroom, and this is how I show up on a daily basis to these four walls. But then students get to come out to a summer camp or a wilderness school, and it's amazing that some of these preconceived notions are non-existent or don't carry the same amount of weight. But also we're exposing individuals to some personal vulnerabilities. We're putting them in a novel situation that already could be uncomfortable. Maybe what they think of when they consider the outdoors isn't necessarily warm and fuzzy and cozy. Recognizing that participants come from all different walks of life, all different circumstances and countries. And when we're talking about the turmoil in various countries, and we want to sleep outside because we think it's exciting and adventurous, sleeping outside might not necessarily be exciting and adventurous to somebody who has lived in a refugee camp for any amount of time. So a lot of the things that we're doing naturally, comfortably, well-intended in our programs potentially could have triggering or activating effects on our participants. So that's kind of, it's a pre-planning element, and these three questions are something that I want us to have in mind when we're planning a program or operating within a program. What vulnerabilities are in your program, and what are they potentially exposing your participants to? So, considering age, ableism, race, sex, orientation, all of those things, what questions are you asking? What's the purpose of asking these questions? Can it be mitigated? And do your participants have a choice? Having choice and agency over what we do on our daily lives is a pretty big piece. And we might consider coming into, again, a challenge course or a hiking expedition, paddling expedition, rock climbing, you name it, as, this is the most fun thing, you got to do it, you got to try it. Well, my personal experience and my perceived risk or understanding and the subjective hazards that I'm identifying, maybe this really great, exciting activity isn't great and exciting. So do I, as the participant, have a choice on how I can engage within that program? Do I have to engage with it at all? And what harm could potentially be done if I just sit out, or if I participate in a slightly different way? So, considering what you're doing and how you could involve other folks in a safe way, either for them or that meets them where they're at, I think is a great start to being emotionally aware. Emotional risk management is risk management. If we're putting people in states of duress and too much challenge, they're probably not showing up to be their best person. They might be nervous and therefore fidgety, fumbly, and depending on what kind of challenge we're exposing them to, it could be a more severe consequence. So, tapping into that emotional side of things, those social skills, building rapport with your participants, students, the people that you are engaging with in these really exciting places. Making sure that you've got a connection and knowing who they are, knowing what, certain trigger points might be with them, preparing them. Those are all great ways, I think, to manage a physical risk as well as an emotional risk kind of at the same time. So emotional risk, I've said it a bunch, but again, here's the definition. It's in the realm of increasing contact with your experience of your heart, feelings, spirit, or self. So kind of going back to one of our original definitions, of, what risk is and the fear or the possibility of losing something that is close and meaningful. When we're asking somebody to, potentially step into an emotionally risky situation, we're getting more to the core of the individual and something that is maybe challenging for them, or very important in their life, and potentially exposing them to certain vulnerabilities. So another definition there: vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure. And when we're considering the emotional risk of our participants, what vulnerabilities do they have that maybe we aren't aware of? Hopefully we work within organizations that do a nice job at outlining and giving us some pre-information on our participants, so that when we meet them, we have some idea. But again, building a relationship and rapport with them as individuals, I think, is one of the best ways to dig a little bit deeper into those documents that we receive, add some personality to the paper, as well as you're more likely to have a connection with somebody, or buy into what somebody's saying if there's a relationship in place. So those are pieces of advice from me, I guess. And then trauma-informed care, that's something that has been on the rise, and I think is more applicable than ever. Trauma-informed care is essentially operating under the assumption that someone has experienced trauma more likely than not. So a couple of statistics here. One CDC study shows 61% of adults having experienced an adverse childhood experience, or ACE. A report in 2013 showed 76% of Canadian adults reporting some form of trauma exposure in their lifetime, of which 9.2% met the criteria for PTSD. So trauma-informed care, very loosely, very basically, is making an assumption that somebody has experienced something that might be triggering, might be activating, and setting up procedures, policies, controls in place that are forward thinking of those people. Just sifting through some of the information online about changes that other organizations have made that are trauma informed. It's taking restraints away from, violent crisis intervention. It's, speaking to your participants at the ropes course or rock climbing wall when they're putting a harness on, and informing them that, you're about to approach them and adjust a harness that's kind of in that bikini zone or the bathing suit area. Having folks have an awareness of what you're doing, and your awareness of where they are coming from is trauma informed. So this is a section that, I could probably do an entire presentation on in itself. But for trauma-informed care, I really just wanted to highlight a few things that are more guidelines, and encourage you all to apply them in the ways that feels appropriate, and speak to your organizations about them. So the 4 R's of trauma-informed care: realization and understanding of how trauma affects individuals, and broadly a realization and understanding that we all have trauma. We all have things that kind of lie beneath the surface. Some things percolate and come up frequently. Other things, maybe they've never come up until you name it. So a realization of how trauma affects individuals is the first R. Second R is recognizing signs of trauma. So, this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but anxiety and panic attacks, fear, anger, irritability, obsessions and compulsions, shock and disbelief, emotional numbing and detachment, depression, shame, and guilt can all be signs of trauma. The response is pretty important. The personal response to the individual, as well as an organizational response for the individual and the staff that might be involved. So, working with staff that have encountered disclosures or other, traumatic events in the field while on trip with Outward Bound. Sometimes they come back and they say, I just didn't know how to deal with this. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. And that's right, you're not. And there's a difference between, being supportive and caring and being a therapist. And main difference is if you are being a good facilitator, a good, kind, caring individual, you're listening and you're not treating. The treating and the prescriptive side of things, we leave that to the therapeutic realm. If that's within your scope of practice, then, I can't really speak to that because it's not in mine, but making sure that you're operating within your scope of practice. If you work with a therapeutic adventure company, this might be. As for the organizational response for the individuals and the staff involved, if it's a disclosure, somebody telling you of a traumatic event and, you can't tell anybody this and, you're the first person I've ever told, they're showing an immense amount of trust to you. And this might be the first time that they've done that. And considering, past relationships and potentially what has affected this person, we want to do our best to help that person, but we need to also make them aware that, while this information is private, that you shouldn't and cannot promise secrecy. That's a relationship that, in a power dynamic that, we really shouldn't step into. If you've received a disclosure from a participant and it needs to be reported to Children Family Services, or you feel that maybe it should, this is something that I would recommend you do. Relationships with families and Children Family Services, Children Family Services, they just want the best for the individual. They're going to set families up with support and other tools to ensure that, that vulnerable individual is receiving the best care that they possibly can. So this kind of gets a little sticky for people sometimes as far as, do I report? Don't I report? What's my responsibility? And, personally, I think that reporting is one of the best things that we can do, and not showing surprise, shock, and awe. And, this person who's sharing something deeply with you, they've probably experienced that shock and feeling of being other from other individuals. And if we can kind of reverse that process and, again, they've trusted us for a reason, and let's maintain and build upon that trust for that person's benefit. And then the final R is avoiding re-traumatization. So, our self-awareness, being aware that the stories you tell can create trauma for somebody else. That could be, again, very well intended, and you're trying to talk somebody down or make them feel less alone, but being aware that, certain stories can exacerbate a situation. Consent, when you are, asking to share this information, to disclose it and report it, as well as when you're sharing this information to the need to know people, consenting that, they are ready to hear this, because sometimes we end up with some pretty sticky conversations with our participants. And again, a follow-up, fair warning, allowing the listener to prepare, limited disclosure, deciding on how much to share, starting with the least traumatic part first, being patient and not forcing someone to talk about it. So the way that I was kind of looking at the top three anyways is more from my reactionary standpoint. And, you know, if I do need to report this to somebody, I need to have self-awareness of how I've responded to the individual who's been sharing with me, as well as self-awareness of who I'm reporting it to. And, you know, are they the right person? Are they in a state and a place to be able to receive this information? So the consent and the fair warning. The limited disclosure, I think that one, that kind of falls in both buckets in my mind, but you know, again, you're sharing the need to know information with the people that need to hear it, that are going to be able to provide help for this person who maybe is disclosing something. And then the last two there, being patient, you know, as somebody's going through their trauma with you, I try and have all the time in the world. Time constraints and things like that might be pressing upon us, but this is hard. This is heavy things. And, you know, if I'm showing that I'm here and available for a participant, and then suddenly, you know, time or something else becomes more important than what they were saying, that potentially has, you know, damaged the relationship, and they're being incredibly vulnerable in this moment, and we weren't there for it. So being patient, and of course, not forcing anybody to talk about it. Christine, I see your hand up.
Hi, Brandon. Thanks. Just a couple of clarifications about the material you just went over. I know that in a lot of cases, there's like a legal obligation to report any, you know, especially when you're working with minors, if there's someone discloses harm or you know, any abuse. I don't know if that's the case with Outward Bound instructors, but I'm wondering if within Outward Bound, within the context of Outward Bound, if there's a protocol, if it would be the Outward Bound instructor that would go to, in BC, it's MCFD, the Ministry of Child and Family Services, or Family Development, whatever. If it would be that instructor, if there's a protocol within the organization to go to somebody within the organization and discuss this. And that's my first question. And then my second question is, in the intake process, is there that sort of declaration made that if there are disclosures of abuse or, you know, intent to self-harm or anything like that, if that protocol is made clear to the participants in advance?
I'll start with your second question, and okay. I don't know that there's policy in place or anything on the admissions level that outlines that to participants. I think that's more where our third R of response comes into play, and that, you know, a youth might not be aware that what they're sharing is a disclosure. So in that event, our response is, you know, more in line with, hey, I really appreciate you sharing this information with me. I'm going to keep it private, but I need to let somebody that can help us out know about this. So it's you in that relationship situation being forthcoming with that information, that, you know, you're not going to keep this a secret. You can't keep it a secret. And that, yes, there is a legal obligation and duty for us as, you know, caretakers for these youth, vulnerable people, that we do need to report. So does that answer the second question anyways?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, for your first question, I think it's probably region to region. Again, just, you know, recognizing that in BC it's this, in Alberta it's that. But I think the firm thing to stand on is that, yes, as caretakers for vulnerable people, we do have a legal obligation in that position of care to report something. And that's sometimes where it gets sticky or uncomfortable for individuals, because they don't want the families to be, harmed or feel uncomfortable in an already potentially bad situation, but that, the family services companies, they're coming in to provide assistance and help out in ways that maybe the family couldn't. So yeah, I guess I don't know what the exact procedure is, region to region within Outward Bound. And I would say, as per the organization that you all work for, check in with what the procedures might be.
Cool.
But that there is an obligation.
I have one other question that's not, it's kind of off track or on a different track.
Sure.
That I've been holding, and maybe I'll just ask it now. Which is, I'm wondering if, you've been doing this for a while. And this sort of came up for me when we were in the academy last fall. I'm wondering if you're seeing more and more young people who are sort of unable to cope with emotional risk taking without the use of their technological devices. Like we all know, like, people use their phones and they get online as a sort of self-soothing mechanism. And I'm wondering if you're noticing that these days, and what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, yes is the the short and easy answer for it, I suppose. I would say resiliency at large is probably down among a lot of folks, especially post-pandemic, and yeah, just how we manage after such a global event like that. And then of course, yeah, we've got folks that are, the digital natives that have been born into the world with a device in their hand, and it's kind of all they know and all they understand. And yeah, definitely, I think there's soothing and things that happen with those devices, and that we as facilitators, we're in a really unique position to, hopefully facilitate our programs. My hope anyways, what I want my programs to be, is unplugged and operating without these devices, and working through these moments of challenge and emotional distress that we might be experiencing, and giving our participants some really good tangible coping mechanisms. And they're things that we probably wouldn't consider coping mechanisms 10 years ago. But going for a walk in the woods could be a great opportunity for somebody to regulate, and using that instead of a phone or a computer. So yeah, I think it's on the rise. I think it's not just youth. I think a lot of folks across the spectrum are challenged by that, and having this device that helps us regulate emotionally and physically. So we've got great big jobs in our positions, facilitating different things with individuals. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I got another raised hand. Howie.
Hey, hi. I just want to supplement what you were saying earlier about the consent or reporting to certain authorities. My background is with Scout Canada, and what happened in case at Scout a situation like that occurred? It is really down to the organization protocol. So for example, at Scouts Canada, what they do is there is a thing called respect in sports too, like that we all the scouts need to attend. And one of the training is that for certain scenario that is related to youth harm, like there is like anything that is harming the youth, or there is vulnerability like exposed to like that will affect the youth. Like we will have to report to children's aid or like the police to a certain extent, but always have this internal protocol first, which is we go into our Scout Canada not chain of command, but like in a way, it's just like there's a board of directors with psychologists and a social worker that we go towards for consultation first to see how we shall help. So this is kind of like discretion by like organization. Yeah. Yep, that's all from my side.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, definitely checking in with and understanding your company's policy on reporting this information is, yeah, fine place to start. And this trauma-informed care, these, again, like they're guidelines, and you know, it's something that is rolling out within organizations. You know, disclosing instances that need to be reported and reporting those, that's nothing new, but how we manage them I think is more the piece that's changing and coming into different workplaces in a variety of ways. So yeah, depending on the work that you're doing, where you're working and who you're working with, please speak to your organization heads and learn those processes. All right. So this might be new or familiar to folks. Johari's window was developed by American psychologist Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham in the 1950s, calling it Johari after combining their first names, Joe and Harry. I thought that was great when I learned it. I thought there was some bigger story, but it's just two guys' names being mashed together. So I'll use this when I'm working with a group of students to identify risk or personal growth, or really a number of different things. But for our purpose and conversation today, I would like to apply this to risk management. And we'll start out with emotional risk, kind of considering our subjective hazards and being trauma informed. So we've got on our x-axis, we've got the self, and on the y-axis, we have others. Kind of looking in the top left quadrant, we have things that are known to others and things that are known to self. So this is an open, free area. This is something that I share willingly. You know, you probably learned it about me within the first 5 minutes of us meeting. Below that is hidden, and nobody knows it but me. It's a secret. I'm keeping that one to myself. I know it, but those around me probably don't know it. Back up to the top right, we have things that are unknown to ourselves, but known to others. So, you know, like some folks, you look at them and there's a certain lack of awareness around something, but everybody else in the room can see that this is a challenge or something. That's a blind spot to an individual. They're not aware of it, but folks around them are. And then the bottom right one is unknown to all. So that's, you know, it's not your fault. You don't know what you don't know. And that's what that quadrant's all about. So again, applying this to emotional risk, if I'm coming into a group of people, or, you know, depending on your program, I like to start with an icebreaker game. And I'm thinking about questions that are accessible, easy enough for the participants to answer and engage with, that's not, you know, causing them to be too vulnerable. This is an icebreaker, and we want people to warm up to the situation. So in this open and free section, that's probably what's being shared. You know, hey, my name's Brandon and I live in Alberta. That's open and free information. Things that are hidden, I'm probably not going to share in an icebreaker game. And this is something that, you know, as you are scaffolding and building your program, maybe would come out. But this could potentially be something that is triggered or activating for a participant, and you know, they're aware of it, but it's something that shows their vulnerability, so they don't come forward with this information. A blind spot. I've worked with participants that, you know, didn't have any flagging information on their form, but a thunderstorm or something has triggered them. This was a blind spot to them. They didn't know that sleeping in a tent in an electrical storm was a triggering event to them. And, you know, there's not a whole lot you can do other than learn about those blind spots. And then being unknown to all, that's something that it gets a little tricky when you're in the moment, because how do you prepare for something that you had no idea was coming your way? As the participant that's maybe going through a traumatic response, they don't know how to deal with this. This is the first time I've ever felt this way. I've never had a panic attack. You as the facilitator, maybe you've never facilitated somebody through a panic attack. This whole unknown area is quite challenging when you're dealing with an emotionally risky situation. You can also apply this to physical risk. All right, activity time. So I'm gonna share a link, hopefully, and get everybody to hop from this presentation into this Jamboard. All right, so I just dropped a link into the chat that should have, oh no. I just received a note on my screen that said Zoom stopped unexpectedly. Is anybody there?
Yep, still here.
Okay, great. Everybody else? See a couple of people showing up.
I'm here. I'm still
okay. Got it. Okay. Great. Is everybody over at our Jamboard? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Great. So this is an activity that I like to do with participants pretty early on in our time together. This is probably something I'll do first day within probably the first 2 hours. I find it a really powerful visual tool for participants to understand that we all have different comfort levels, different things that we're comfortable with, challenged by certain things. And this is my first time doing it on an online platform, so I hope it works. But yeah, in person, I would draw a couple of large circles on the ground, or use, you know, a circle of rope or a hula hoop to do this. But to start out, and to make sure that I've got everybody here on the Jamboard, on the left-hand side, select a sticky note with a letter on it and pop it into the green circle in the middle, please.
It's showing view only. Maybe if it's not.
Yeah, we need access, edit access.
Oh no. All right, 1 second. When you click on it, is it offering? Okay, yeah. Thought I gave everybody access before, but yeah, if you need, go ahead and send the request for access to me, and I'll address that here quickly. Thought I had set this up so that everybody had editing rights if they had the link, but so
Happy to be your guinea pig group while you're figuring this out.
I super appreciate that. Thank you. So yeah, while I'm bringing people in, essentially I would set this up, like I said, 2 circles on the ground, and I would have everybody come into the middle and put their right foot in the middle of the circle. I would explain that this is your comfort zone. This is an area that you are so comfy, cozy, happy in. It's your house on a Saturday with the sun coming in. You've just had a great breakfast or whatever, your comfort zone. And then I have here, 20 or so questions that I would ask, and participants would move away from their comfort zone into this zone of opportunity, or potentially into the panic zone, if that's what is coming alive based on the question. And taking time at each of these questions to kind of notice in our circle where everybody is. Does everybody have access to this now? Can they move a sticky note?
I just find out I need to go to the email link in order to get the access. So it's just like the screen that you just like for everyone else, like you need to go to the email, your email mailbox, and there is a link so you can access for the edit rates.
For me, all that happened was the toolbar arrived on the left-hand side of the screen where there was no toolbar before. Suddenly there was a toolbar and I could access it.
Hmm.
Or you can just go to the link in the chat and reopen it, and it works when you reopen it.
Ah, nice,
Or maybe refresh. Probably I didn't refresh last time.
Good old refresh.
Excellent. All
plug
right.
it, unplug and plug it back in.
Yeah, shake it
That was good.
out, whatever. Awesome. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly so that the folks that would be doing this at home on the recording have context of what I'm talking about. So is everybody on their screen now seeing the circle of opportunity?
Yeah.
Perfect. So again, with this activity, I've got my comfort zone in the middle. I've got my zone of opportunity just outside of that. And then typically I only have like 2 hula hoops. So the panic zone and the zone of misadventure is just kind of that far away outside area. And with my series of questions, people are going to move towards the comfort zone, away from the comfort zone, potentially into that zone of misadventure and panic, if that's what's resonating with them. And again, using this to highlight that we all kind of have different comfort levels, areas of growth, and zones that really, really freak us out. So my first question, and move the direction, move your sticky note in the direction that feels appropriate. How do you feel about trying new foods? Just click your sticky note and yeah. All right. Zone of opportunity, it's comfortable. Nice. How do you feel about talking in front of strangers? Zone of opportunity, feeling pretty comfortable. Excellent. Talking in front of a group of your peers. Yeah, awesome. Asking for directions. Great. Trying to speak a new language, maybe in the country that is the native tongue. Yeah, yeah, maybe an opportunity for misadventure, maybe a zone of opportunity, depending on your level of comfort with that language. Is it entirely new? How do we feel about sleeping outside? Excellent. Using a map and compass to navigate. We're lost, and this is how we're going to get found. I'm just going to move the whole circle. How do we feel about using our phone and Google Maps to navigate? Yeah, super comfortable. It even tells you which lane to be in. Don't use those last three, use this one. Pretty comfortable. Walking around in a big city. I was just in Calgary this last weekend, and it makes me pretty uncomfortable. I'm in the zone of opportunity for sure. And how do we feel about walking around in the woods? Great. Apologizing for something that you've done. Next time I'll make sure to like merge the image so nothing can move around. And let's see, receiving a compliment. How does that feel? Yeah, some people find it really comfortable. Others, it's like, I'm going to deflect that. No, it was all you. Using the bathroom outside. No outhouse, no porta potty. You're digging a hole in the ground. Nice, my people. Cooking food. Everybody's pretty comfortable cooking food. How about cooking a new recipe for somebody else? Getting closer to that zone of opportunity. Yeah, cool. Trying a new skill. Perfect. And explaining your feelings to someone. Cool. Thanks. So yeah, with you three as the example on the screen here and the amount of times that you've moved forwards and backwards, I would use this as an opportunity to highlight that we're all coming to this experience with different understandings, different experience levels, different challenges and areas of growth. And this is one of the ways that I would engage a group in emotional risk management and front loading this experience, highlighting this, that, you know, just because you're comfortable with it doesn't mean that it's easy and comfortable for everybody else. Again, starting this at the beginning of a program is what I like to do. This is also something that you could do later on with a group, and you could just draw it in the sand or use hula hoops on the concrete, depending on where you're teaching and who you're working with. So yeah, thanks for engaging with that. We'll hop on over to the main slideshow again. And if folks, somebody could just tell me that your screen says activity time, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome.
Oh,
Thanks.
okay.
Great. So just, yeah, recognizing our time. I'll go through this. Again, if folks need to hop out at any time, please feel free. And thanks for spending additional time with me today. So potential causes of accidents in outdoor pursuits, outdoor adventures, whatever you would like to call them. One of the areas is potentially unsafe conditions due to inadequate area security, physical, political, or cultural. Just thinking about different countries, different landlines that we might cross, considering those. Unsafe conditions from oncoming objects, rocks, deadfall, sweepers, strainers. If you're paddling, those are things that are in the water. Bad weather can cause a lot of different issues for us if we are without shelter. Inadequate equipment and clothing, swift or cold water, plants and animals, physical and psychological state of staff or participants. Again, that's more speaking to our emotional risk management. What are our participants currently going through emotionally, and how are their emotions affecting our physical realm? Potentially unsafe acts due to the lack of protection, instruction, or supervision has been cause for accidents. Unsafe speed, too fast or too slow. If you're going too slow under an overhang of rock, that could be potentially hazardous if something were to fall, or if it's ice, something like that. Improper, inadequate food, water, and medication. If you're dehydrated or malnourished, probably not thinking clearly. Unfortunately, wrong time and wrong place is also a cause for accidents. And unauthorized or improper procedure. So just operating outside of your scope of practice or what you know how to do. And potential errors in judgment due to a desire to please others, adhering to a schedule. We were just talking about this the other day, about how, when you have to make these deadlines because you're on a 5-day hike, that certain stresses and pressures come into play that might not otherwise if you were just base camping and you didn't have a distance to cover, or got to get the kids back on the bus at 1:15. Misperception can cause error in judgment. I thought this is what it said. This is actually what it meant. New or unexpected situation. So again, to the emotional side of things, I didn't expect to be in a panicked state about this. The fear that washed over me caused me to see things differently. Fatigue and distraction. It's been a long day. It's been a long trip. You're distracted thinking about your warm bed at home instead of managing the risk here in the field with you. Miscommunication, disregarding your instincts. Our instincts typically keep us safe, but they can also come into play as a form of a heuristic trap, and it always works out, and I always do it this way. And then sometimes it doesn't work out, and that heuristic trap has gotten us into trouble. So this is the Meyer-Williamson matrix of potential causes of accident in outdoor pursuits. Meyer and Williamson matrix brings this information up online if you're curious and reading more about it. Managing wildlife, considering wildlife as part of our risk management plan, pretty important. Time of year, are the animals in hibernation mode, migration mode, or reproduction mode? Knowing where you're traveling, are there animal closures? Is this an active animal corridor? And avoiding them if they are closed. A lot of birds of prey have nesting areas that have seasonal closures. All sorts of animals migrating through different corridors, and being aware of those times. If you do encounter wildlife, or there is a great potential to encounter them, being aware of your position of them. If you are downwind and you're coming into this herd of elk that's on the screen, they don't smell you, but you can probably smell them. So making them aware of your presence as to not sneak up on them and spook a herd or, you know, a large animal. If you are on higher or lower ground than that animal, you know, I can find myself feeling pretty uncomfortable if I'm on the lower ground to a grizzly bear up on an embankment or something. Your positioning between parents and offspring, you know, you don't want to find yourself with mama bear on one side and the cubs on the other side. You'll see a protective mama bear pretty quickly in some cases. Where in their environment are you? Are you transitioning from forest to meadow, meadow to forest, in which case, you know, make a little bit of additional noise. And in those transition zones, again, you don't want to startle a large animal. Similarly, is your camp located near running water? Are you collecting water, and is the water sound so loud that the animal might not hear you approaching, or at the campsite, it might not know that you're there because of the water? Making lots of noise is one of the easiest ways to mitigate this one. But other things that can be helpful, you know, we've got equipment, some wildlife deterrents that are in the form of bear spray, you know, large can of mace, essentially, bear bangers, fancy little bottle rocket kind of thing. The further north you go, firearms become almost mandatory, and training and carrying them is required. Managing risk with animal-proof containers. There's bear bins and bags and all sorts of things to keep your food away from the animals, as well as the animals away from your food. Common phrase in the Rockies is a fed bear is a dead bear. Food habituated animals, unfortunately, get destroyed because they stop foraging for their proper food and just head to the campground, so they become a nuisance. So doing what you can to keep your food safe so that other animals don't become reliant on our quick and easy calories instead of foraging for berries. That's personal and wildlife risk management there. And then the accessibility part, knowing where your deterrents and things like that are, keeping your bear spray close on your hip. I was hiking along a trail, encountered a bear, and formed the group behind me. He said, "Should I take my bear spray out of my backpack?" And I stopped and I thought, yes, it should have been out the entire time. Your bear spray at the bottom of your bag, much like first aid kit, isn't as readily accessible when you need it. So I always keep my bear spray on my hip, on a shoulder pack, shoulder strap on my backpack, ready, accessible. Time is of the essence if you've got a large creature in front of you. Risk management strategies considering participant readiness. So kind of again with this, we can look at it from an emotional risk management or a physical risk management. So my two axes here, we've got real risk present on the y-axis and participant readiness on our x-axis there. Thinking of participant readiness in terms of, is it day one, first activity that you're doing with a group? Is it end of the trip and this is the final challenge? Kind of considering it in that realm. And then the real risk present, you know, is it a objective or subjective hazard, considering those. In the bottom corner, we've got low, and on the top and bottom there, we've got high risk present or high participant readiness. So using this to inform and transfer or mitigate risk as necessary. You know, if the bottom left there is low, then that middle line, we're going to call that medium risk or medium readiness. So if you have low participant readiness and low real risk present, you might consider reducing that risk even further. You can do that in a variety of ways. My next slide, we kind of go through how to reduce and do all of that. So I won't spend a whole lot of time here. If you have high participant readiness and the real risk present is low, you might consider retaining the risk. Again, a lot of the work that we do in the outdoors is inherently risky. We take certain precautions and steps to retain that risk through a variety of ways, be it scaffolding and preparing our students and individuals, or with the use of equipment. If your participant readiness is low and the real risk is present and high, you might consider avoiding this. The challenge is too high, too great. The consequences outweigh the benefit, and we're probably just going to avoid this. If you have high participant readiness and high risk present, you could consider transferring the risk. So, maybe for the world of Outward Bound, we would consider hiring an additional guide so that we could go into terrain that our guides cannot, our instructors cannot. Or maybe you're transferring the risk through insurance and waivers that participants sign, an acknowledgement of this risk and a willingness and acceptance to step into it. So the 4 alternatives, we're just going to go over again what we just heard. But yeah, retention, pretty common in this work that we're doing. We recognize the risk, and we have, at least as Outward Bound, audits and third parties that come in and check out our systems and make sure that the retention of risk that we're operating within is feasible and best practice. So it's after consideration and of the risk and the readiness of the company, the participants, the individuals. Avoidance, of course, making a conscious decision not to accept the risk at that particular time. Reduction, again, through equipment, procedures, training, scaffolding, building up to that experience with your participants, the process of it all. And then finally, transferring it through insurance, outsourcing it, hiring a guide, or having your participants assume the risk with a waiver. Any questions about that? Awesome.
So for retention, does that mean like you're keeping that risk like it as if like it is a low risk and it is a awareness, like, yeah, there is a risk and then we are doing something about it kind of position in that?
Yeah, exactly. So, from an admissions level with Outward Bound, a certain amount of risk is assumed by all participants coming to our program. We inform of a certain amount of risk as well, that, scrapes, bumps, bruises, that kind of stuff is quite possible. And, if we're hiking and paddling, we recognize and assume that risk, and it's all part of it. So we retain it, and there has been careful consideration of retaining that risk, and then potentially we've reduced it as well with equipment and other factors.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great question. And then this is kind of taking our information and, if we decide to retain that risk, how are we managing the risk ourselves? So determining the objective, what's the program objective? What's your personal objective? What are the objectives of the individual in the group? How do they all align is pretty important. You as the facilitator, making sure that your personal objectives aren't blurring what the program objectives are. I think that's a great place to manage risk. Identifying the risks. So in a briefing period, or with your friends before you go out on a multi-day backpacking or even a day hike, thinking of what potential risks you might encounter while you're out there, hazards, etc. Evaluating them, from an organizational standpoint, we collect data and sift through it. And why is it that on the third day of backpacking trips, we have this consistently showing up? We would look at those things, evaluate them, try and find some controls and things that we could put into place to potentially get rid of that situation, but considering all the risks, evaluating them and their severity. Consider alternate methods of handling that risk. If you can't go over it, can you go around it? Can you go through it? That kind of thing. Selecting the most appropriate method. So, kind of going back to steps 1, 2, and 3. If you've got to do a river crossing as the example, that's your objective. The risks that are present, cold water, swift water, that might be something. Evaluate the risks. Is there any way that you can handle it? Well, we got to go through it. We can't go under it. So perhaps that is your most appropriate method. Implement the method and then review and evaluate. So a non-event. So just because an accident didn't happen doesn't mean that it won't ever happen. Really looking at the events that you're leading, the objectives that you're going through, and what were the possible risks? What did you avoid, narrowly miss, and then kind of wash, rinse, repeat this whole cycle again of how can you manage it better the next time. Planning and preparation is going to be a huge element of risk management. And 4 yeses to know, you need to know your route, handrails, and backstops. So those are, if you're looking at a map, you've got, well, if you're on a river, it might be a little bit easier. Your handrail is kind of the embankment along the way. If you're hiking, the trail might have a river or a creek that it traverses, and that would be a handrail. A backstop is something that I would run into if I went too far. So looking at the map as a whole, identifying where you want to go. And I know we've gone too far if we hit this big, beautiful lake that you see in the photo here. And how far is that? Well, that's 2 kilometers too far, and we know to back up there. Evacuation points, have a good idea of how people could get out if they needed to, how you could assist, or if you need additional assistance. Points of interest, just knowing your route, knowing what's going to be of interest to your participants. And of course, if you're staying out overnight, where your campsites are, so that at the end of the day, you're not just wandering, hopeful for a flat spot to sleep on. Know your participants. At an admissions level, companies do a pretty good job at asking important questions to set participants up for success. In the event that you don't have an admissions program with your organization, or don't have access to that information, just knowing your participants, finding ways to connect with them, have one-on-one conversations, get to know who they are, what makes them tick, personal motivations, etc. I think that's great risk management. Knowing what to expect on your outing, what the weather might be like, the terrain that you're coming into, what sort of conditions. Is it a hot, dry summer and fire danger is through the roof? Is it like it was in the Rockies last year where we had a 40-centimeter snowpack July? Knowing what you're getting into and how to manage that should you come across it. Knowing what you need to go out and more importantly, knowing how to use it. So all of your equipment required for success, do you have the appropriate clothing, the appropriate activity specific equipment, as well as safety equipment? So maybe that's self-rescue or group rescue equipment, first aid kits, things like that. Do you have a communication device, or have you communicated what your route plan is with your organization or even a friend? Do you have a satellite phone, a remote spot or inReach device that maybe doesn't have two-way communication, but an SOS button if you really need assistance? Do you have a mobile phone with you, and are you even within service? Can you use it where you're going, or is it just a glorified paperweight? Do you have maps? Do you have the right maps? Do you have backups of anything that might potentially get broken and be critical to the success of your day trip or overnight? Do you have a repair kit? Do you have, again, emergency equipment such as first aid kits, EpiPens, medications, all of that stuff ready to go? And again, do you know how to use it all? That's pretty key. You can have all of the equipment and not know how to use it, and it won't do you any good. And then I've given us a few different tools, ways to look at risk, manage risk, mitigate risk, and now just a quick acronym. It's RAMER. It's like Kramer, but no K. And the first part of it is recognize. Recognize the possible and present risk. So in your planning and preparation stage, knowing the terrain, knowing, again, potentially the hazards that are out there, and preparing yourself for them with equipment and know-how or otherwise. Assessing them, the likelihood and severity. Minimize and mitigate. So do you have the right equipment? Do you have a plan B? And then finally, emergency response. So do you have first aid? Do you have access to assistance? If you need it, what's the evacuation plan? And regrouping after an emergency situation is something that I find very valuable for a group to kind of shake it off or process the experience for themselves as group. And yeah, that regrouping I find pretty key in our personal emergency response. Naturally, emergency response, if it's really going down and you need helicopter assistance, please make sure that you're checking in with the local protocols of your organization or land management in your area. Any questions about planning and preparation? Awesome. Near misses, and I believe this is our last slide. I just wanted to touch on it because in my experience, this has been a big question for staff that I've supervised. You know, what is a near miss? How do I know? What do I do with this information? So a near miss is an event that occurs that does not result in injury or loss of time, but it could have. That tree fell and it landed right next to me. I was okay and everybody else was fine, but man, that really could have hurt. That would be a near miss. Similarly, like slips, trips, and falls in an area that if that individual continued to fall, you know, kind of this backdrop in my slideshow here on top of that ridge, a slip, trip, and fall on top of that ridge could be very harmful for that person, but it could also just be, I fell and I stopped. That would be a near miss. A boat capsizing, kind of any event that the first aid kit is used for. And I use that as a guiding line for me. Not every organization or workplace requires that. My personal thoughts on it are infection happens really, really easily. So if I have to pull the first aid kit out I'm making a note of that somewhere. Maybe it's just a blister, a sliver, or a small scrape. But again, with infection, that problem becomes a lot more challenging for everybody, especially if you're in the backcountry. Again, near miss where something almost happened. So an animal bluff charging you, the bear took 3 steps towards the group, but then it turned around and nothing actually happened. We're going to call that a near miss, an animal encounter. Something operating where you're operating out of your scope of practice or the standard operating procedure could be considered a near miss. And again, your organization might have its own definition for what a near miss is. What to do when a near miss occurs? Again, regrouping with your group, identifying what just happened, what potentially could have gone wrong, making sure that emotionally everybody's okay after that bear just bluff charged us. That's a pretty serious incident. Even though nothing happened, there's no scratches. Wow, I've never had a 300-pound animal come at me that fast before. I'm pretty elevated. Helping people through that experience. Making any pertinent notes so that you can properly report this. Creating a culture of learning and reporting within your workplaces is a really great way to learn from these near misses. And oftentimes I'll think of like a ski resort when this comes to mind, that if I made a mistake as a lift operator or something like that, and nobody caught it and nobody got hurt, I might just keep that one to myself because I don't want to be embarrassed. But creating a culture where mistakes can be learned from, and mistakes are something that we learn from, I think is a better way to navigate that world versus brushing it under the rug. And then somebody's maybe destined to trip on that bump and make that same mistake. So tracking those events, certain workplaces have really good incident tracking report forms. And it's all digitized, so you can see kind of the trends of things. And this program area had more incidents than anywhere else. Those can be pretty useful, but might be more organizationally dependent. And that's it. That's all. So yeah, thank you all so much. And I've got time for questions. I realize I've gone 35 minutes over what I said I would talk. So I'm sorry about that, but thanks so much for hanging out and the questions that have been asked so far. I'll keep recording until we get all the questions, just in case folks have questions at home. But yeah, Howie, it's Herbert, right?
Oh, I was just clapping.
Oh.
But yeah, thanks for the overview of all different types of risks, especially covering the emotional side, like that's some, or the mental side. That's something that like for my risk management or preparedness that I used to do. Like we haven't thought too much on that side of the when we look into preparing what may happen during the trip and what to engage and all that. But yeah, thanks for showing all these information.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Brendan. Lots of great information here.
No problem. Yeah, thank you, Christine.
Yes, Brendan, thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's very thorough. I just have another question. I'm just wondering if around access to the other 2 presentations, because I missed those and I'd really like to see them as well. So
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, I'll just make a note right here for you, Bertha.
Thank you. Okay.
I think what we'll do is we've been sending out kind of a thanks for watching and thanks for joining us. We will provide access to the other webinars in those. It might be yeah, we'll see about getting all the links and stuff included. And yeah, I'll make this presentation available as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, super. Yeah, thanks again, folks. Again, like I super appreciate everybody hanging out and taking the time to think about risk management. Like I said, it's something that I firmly believe in, and if it's done right, we're setting each other and our participants up for more adventures. You know, risk management can sometimes get a bad rap for, you know, being fun police and all of that, but I think it's pretty important for what we're out there doing. So yeah, thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you.